Want to know the most powerful tool to grow a brand? One word, 4 syllables, and a lifetime of intention. Reputation. We're going behind the scenes talking to the experts who know what it really takes to build a brand and make it look easy. From media pundits and PR pros to spin doctors and CEOs, our guests have the inside scoop on how a public image is built, bolstered, or busted. We'll offer insight on episodes of Reputation Matters, the podcast, because to be successful in the public eye, reputation matters.
Welcome to Reputation Matters. Our guest today is a veteran sports reporter. He's been at the Dallas Morning News since 1993 and has been covering the Dallas Mavericks for 2 decades. He brings insight, depth, and accountability to coverage of one of the NBA's most distinguished and well-known teams. Our guest today is an expert on brand reputation as it relates to sports franchises, athletes, journalism, and sports journalism. Can't wait to hear today from Brad Townsend. Brad, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate you being here.
Well, I appreciate you having me. Thanks for using veteran, which is probably a euphemism for old, but I appreciate it.
Well, we're in the same category, so I can relate. You're in good, or at least what I hope is good company. You've had a busy NBA season with the Mavs, and let's start with what everybody's been talking about over the last few months, which is the Mavs trade of Luka Dončić. So from your perspective, from a reputation perspective, a brand perspective for the Mavs and for Luka, walk us through the public perception blowback that the Mavs went through with this trade and your perspective on seeing it all firsthand, front row.
Well, if you don't mind, I should probably start at the last part of your question, which is, my personal view, and I'll just start with the night of the trade, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
And
remind us when that was. What was the
that
date?
would have been the night of February the 1st.
Okay.
And so I'd been out with my wife. Had just gotten in. It was about 10:30, and I got a text from someone, a high-level person from the Mavs, and they said, well, sorry to hit you with this on a Saturday night. Need to give you a heads up on something. Are you available? And I said, well, sure. And fortunately, I'd just gotten home. And so I waited. A couple more texts went by. I'm still waiting. He said, well, hold on. And literally a couple minutes later, the text from an ESPN reporter went out saying Luka Dončić had been traded. And my text reply to this high-level Mavs person is, are you referring to the tweet that just went out from ESPN? And the response was, yup. And so literally, you're asking me from my prism, that's where I was. I was in the middle of it. And frankly, had I not been texting with that person at that moment, I would have thought it was a hoax.
So let me ask you this. Okay, most journalists want to be the first to break a story.
Right.
You're the hometown sports reporter for the Dallas Morning News. You cover the Mavs. Were you irritated that another outlet had the news first?
You're always going to be irritated. Unfortunately, in this situation, in the situation of like breaking NBA news, especially of this magnitude, I wouldn't say I've kind of gotten used to it because there is a pecking order that goes on. And frankly, if you look at it, ESPN pays the NBA billions.
Yeah.
Lots of, multi-billions. And so, and I don't know who is talking to who at this point. Usually information like this gets out through an agent.
Okay.
So I don't know who's communicating with whom at this point. I don't know if that person was independently, if the ESPN reporter was communicating independently with somebody else. I don't know.
But you have to get over it and
I
move
have to.
on.
Right, because at this point, I'm already slacking my office saying, hey, I'm on this. And my tweet went out probably like 30 seconds or a minute after, because my tweet was, I can confirm the shocking news is true. I could confirm it because I was literally being given the heads up. So that's the prism, and it was shocking. I've been a sports writer for 40 years, probably the second second most shocking in terms of Mavs was when they traded Jason Kidd. And that would have been in 1996. And I'm aging myself again, but I was literally had just arrived at American Airlines at that point, Reunion Arena, to cover just what I thought was a December 26th game that the Mavericks were playing. And I was pulled aside and told that, we're trading Jason Kidd. Just want to give you the heads up. At that point, there's no Twitter, of course.
Right.
But they wanted to let me know. And then the acting general manager at that point said, why do you have that surprised look on your face? And I said, well, you just told me you traded Jason Kidd.
Yeah.
So there is a personal level of this. It's a natural shocked reaction. But the Luka trade is magnified. I think I tweeted that it was 10 times, but it's probably like 50 times more shocking.
So for our audience that doesn't follow basketball, doesn't follow the Mavs, and doesn't follow Luka, why was this such a big deal?
Well, first of all, he's a generational superstar. He is he's clearly one of the top 3 talents in the NBA. Could you say, well, he should stay in better shape? Should he carpet officials less than he does? Yeah, but he was leading the NBA in scoring last year. He's coming off of a season when he led the Mavericks to the NBA Finals. He is a generational talent.
Yeah.
And so just from that standpoint alone, that is shocking. Then you have the element where he is just universally beloved in Dallas.
Right.
That is a PR nightmare. And that is frankly why the Mavericks this high-level person was reaching out to me, because they knew that in addition to the news itself, they needed to have some level of, I wouldn't say control, but they certainly needed to get their messaging out.
So you said a moment ago that you thought originally that it was a hoax.
Or there would have been, I would have thought that had I not been involved in that conversation, I would have thought that the ESPN reporter's account had been hacked.
So, but one of the reasons you certainly might have thought it was a hoax is because he's this generational star and beloved in Dallas. Give folks a sense of to what the blowback was and how the Mavs responded.
Well, the blowback was immediate. You could just see it on Twitter, people responding to oh no, I thought, Brad, I was hoping this was a joke. Now you're saying it's true. The blowback was immediate. It was shock. I would actually compare it to stages of grief. It was initially shock and disbelief, and then very quickly the anger set in. And then you have the realization that this is true, and this is a permanent thing. Mm-hmm. And so the early stages of that were the Mavericks. Myself and my colleague Mike Curtis, we did talk to Nico Harrison that night,
the general manager.
When we had the conversation, it was, hey, this trade is actually not official. We are about to have a conversation. We're about to get online, with the league for the formal approval. And so what we say here, we would, the only understanding was that we not print those quotes until after the deal became official, because you're not really supposed to be commenting.
Right.
So I'm giving you some inside,
how
the how the sausage is made, so to speak.
Right. And the relationship between reporters and these
right.
teams.
And it's worth it to us. We're the only ones that really had an extensive interview with Nico Harrison in that fresh aftermath.
Was he prepared? Did he understand the magnitude of this trade? Because, a lot of people thought, at least nationally, that a week later things will calm, and months later,
right,
things did not calm. Was he prepared initially?
There is no way that he knew. There is no way that even clearly the Mavericks did not know. They knew that there would be some blowback, but they did not know that it was going to be on this level. And that was frankly, more inside, how the sausage is made. That was my first question to Nico. I'm seeing the blowback online, literally in real time. And my first question to him is, do you realize how big a deal this is? And what do you say to fans who are shocked and angry? And his answer was, I understand why people will be upset initially, but I believe that the results that we are putting a championship team on the floor, and I believe that anger will subside.
Yeah.
So he gave the right answer. But everything that's happened since then is very indicative that it clearly shows that the franchise did not know the level of blowback it would be. And of course, the blowback was obviously also even more proportionally bigger because the player they acquired came in and played one game.
Got injured.
The team looked great, but that made it all the worse.
Right.
And then another level of this is, I shouldn't pat myself too much on the back, but the team owner, Governor Patrick Dumont, he's given 2 interviews. That's his ownership style, okay? One was to me about 2 months after his family purchased the Mavericks, and the other was to me a few days after the trade. And so he realized that he can't leave Nico out there, that this was an organizational decision, or at least 2 people in the organization made this decision, the 2 biggest decision makers in the organization. So the governor, Patrick Dumont, was certainly not going to leave Nico Harrison out. But it's obviously also clear from Patrick's and mine's conversation, that interview that took place, that they were not prepared for the blowback either.
So again, I want to be respectful of the fact that as a journalist you need to try to be objective, but also as a student of brand perception, and obviously having observed for decades organizations and brands and individuals that handle themselves well with the media and handle themselves not as well with the media, and then that ends up resulting, the coverage is what it is based on how they behave. Is there a lesson here, in your opinion, for the Mavericks that they either got or did not get?
There is a lesson in, frankly, I thought they tried, okay? And clearly I appreciated the fact that they understood that the Dallas Morning News is the media organization of record in Dallas. And I would say that Patrick also realized that I was not throwing softball questions. That was my one opportunity to ask what's on the fans' mind. So I asked him tough questions, and he answered every one of them. Okay, the lesson here is that once Anthony Davis got hurt, then Kyrie Irving also got hurt, and this whole thing snowballed. The lesson here is that the Mavericks leadership, while initially they tried to do the right thing, they tried to answer the hard questions, they stayed silent for 2 full months while this thing snowballed. And, a couple days after the end of the season, I find myself in the press conference asking Nico Harrison, did you learn a lesson as a franchise leader in stepping up in times of crisis? And he said, yes, absolutely, we own that. But that 70-plus days was pretty painful.
Pretty brutal. Let's talk about this news conference, though, and then we can move on. There was this media roundtable, and they said no live streaming, no live tweeting, no audio or video recording. It was just very apparent, at least based on what I read or saw, that they were trying to control the narrative, which every brand should, but also trying to control the media. That rarely works, does it?
That was is
that a wrong assessment?
No, I think if you're looking at it, that's clearly the perception. That's clearly the takeaway. And just full disclosure, I was not one of the ones invited. There were 12, I believe about 12 people, but no 2 people from a single organization. So our beat writer, Mike Curtis, who I referenced earlier, he was invited. And then pretty much like 1 from each TV station. So from that standpoint, I kind of understood why I wasn't one of the one, but I was also like, well, I have covered this team for 30 years.
Yeah. Well, and reporters are human also, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you let your 101, I mean, mm-hmm. you've answered this question throughout your career. How do you keep your personal opinions and expectations at bay, particularly with a brand you've covered for 30 mm-hmm. years, you have relationships. Mm-hmm. How do you do that? And on the other side of that, how do you write a tough story mm-hmm. that needs to be told and then sit on the same airplane on a return game with the entire team and ownership sitting right there with you?
Well, first of all, we're not on the plane. Now, there were times in recent years. There were times when we were on the plane, back of the plane. We pay for the seat, but
sure.
Neither here nor there. That never really became a problem.
Proximity wasn't an issue.
That was not an issue. And frankly, you're around them every day anyway. Part of your job is to ask the tough questions and write the tough story. And frankly, a big responsibility is to make sure you're there after you ask those tough questions and the product is online and people are reading it, it's in the newspaper. You show up the next day.
Yeah.
You be there in case they have a problem with what you wrote. So it's a two-way street. They have Nico Harrison and Patrick Dumont, they have a public responsibility to the fans. And we have as journalists, if you're doing your job correctly, and you have a responsibility to stand up for and be accountable for your work too.
What was it like in the Mark Cuban days, and how has it changed?
I mean, that's frankly, it's been night and day, and that's been a big lesson in this. One of the many interviews I've seen in the aftermath of the Luka thing, I guess we can call it, was Mark being interviewed by WFAA. And one of the points he made, now he was being asked about the trade, and he kind of danced around that. I wouldn't have made it. It wasn't my decision, but he was trying to be. But the most authoritative thing he said, and when I said, yeah, you're right, is when he said, the biggest thing that this franchise is missing is someone like me in times like this to be the public face and to take the bullets. He didn't use that phrase, but that's in essence what he was saying, is that they miss me, someone like me as a public face. Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree with that. That is going to be a big problem going forward for the franchise, because now, until and unless the results on the court play out the way the Mavericks, there's a huge public distrust about Nico Harrison's job performance and decision making, and so that cloud's going to remain.
Likability is important, isn't it?
It is. And to your bigger question about, we could get into this more. The Cuban era versus this era, I think it's frankly a lesson for any corporation, because the way I view it is, and I think sports and say your corporate, whether medical corp, yeah. I think it's very similar. I think there's 3 levels of messaging. Okay, the 30,000 foot view is the messaging that comes into an organization, and the messaging that comes out of the organization. You want to exercise some kind of control over what that narrative is. Within that, the third and the most important one is what's happening within the organization, and that would be what we would call culture.
Right.
And what happens in that organization affects, obviously, those other 2 things, the messaging that comes in and the messaging that goes out. And so at a time when crisis does hit, if your culture's not, if people are having problems with the culture, that stuff's going to leak out.
Yeah.
So and if you don't have a relationship with the media, then you've lost control of that messaging.
Because someone inside is going to reach out to members of the news media like you,
right,
to share what's going on. How How important are leaks and inside sources, unnamed sources, to you in your work?
They are big. I mean, it's different for me. The Dallas Morning News has sourcing standards. And so obviously in a situation where you look at the Mavericks, things have been pretty good for Nico Harrison's 4 years. You would say that until 3 months ago, he was like a golden. Everything he was doing was turning. They went to the conference finals. They went to the NBA finals. Those were above expectations. Even the deals that he made that were initially panned turned out very well.
Yeah.
But by the same token, Nico, he came from a corporate world in Nike. He is a soft-spoken guy. He does not believe in being in front of the camera. Constantly communicating with reporters, and that worked well. That was great during the NBA Finals run. But as I asked him the other day, I mean, that's admirable because you're putting the athletes and the coaches first. You're giving them the credit, right?
Right.
But in a time of crisis, you've got to stand up.
Let's go back to Cuban for just a moment. When Mark Cuban first bought the Mavericks, he was also a controversial figure, sitting, by the basket, second row, same seat. I think he sat in the same seat for the duration of his ownership, and perhaps still does.
Yeah.
What changed for Mark Cuban that turned him, and I'm way oversimplifying, from a bit of a controversial outsider who came to the Mavs to someone almost beloved? At least that seems to me to be the perception. Whether you loved him as a reporter or not, I have no idea. But what do you think he did from a perception perspective to earn that trust, if anything?
That's a great question, because I always liked Mark. I liked his accessibility. I appreciate the accessibility now, and frankly, he and I have butted heads more than a few times. He's disagreed with things I've written. He'll DM me, that was, don't agree with that, but we'll go back and forth on that.
Maybe
and
more colorful language, perhaps.
Probably, yeah, maybe. So we do have that relationship where if he disagrees with something I write, frankly, I think the public always liked Mark. I think the public liked that outspokenness. They liked the fact that he was win first, I'm going to spend money. Now, maybe if you were not a Mavericks fan, you didn't like it.
Huh.
You didn't like being a fan of San Antonio and having him make fun of the Riverwalk, right? But as a Mavericks fan, I think he's always been beloved, especially because the previous ownership was not that, right?
Wasn't out in front, for sure.
Was not out front,
yeah.
Right.
So it's such an interesting case study. Do you think that, when he gives interviews or when he talks, he appears to be speaking off the cuff, being very open, transparent, frank, if not just reactionary?
Right. He is.
Is it?
Yeah, and I will say the one thing that changed over the years is the accessibility that I mentioned. It used to be, before every home game, you knew where to find him. He was on his Stairmaster. And it was kind of I don't know if the word's demeaning. You're standing, as a reporter, you're standing beneath the Stairmaster and he's got sweat dripping off of him and you're asking him these questions. But, he's top. There was no filter on him. Huh. But I think he realized over time that, no filter on me is not always a good thing, especially because he couldn't control the messaging. Like he could say what he could say, how it was printed and
which part was used.
In which part was used, I think he realized, I need to be more circumspect in terms of how often I'm available.
Yeah, well, or if it's not availability, I mean, we coach our clients to say this is a discipline, right? You want to look and appear like you're very transparent and open,
right,
but be very calculated and discerning about what you're actually going to say.
Absolutely, and Mark learned that over the years.
Let's transition. And you may or may not have a comment about this, but Dallas and North Texas, which you've covered sports here for 30 years, has a lot of larger than life figures. Another, of course, is Jerry Jones. And you can't talk about sports in North Texas without bringing up the Cowboys. Mm-hmm. How, after all of these years, would you assess the reputation of the Cowboys and of Jerry Jones as a sports reporter?
Well, on the field, clearly, there's, the interpretation, the perception is they have not performed as the Dallas Cowboys should be performing. 3 decades of not making a conference finals puts them on a list of just a handful of organizations that haven't done that. From a business standpoint, let me tell you, I was having a conversation with the Golden State Warriors. I was doing a profile on the new Mavericks CEO, and he had worked at Golden State for these owners. And I mentioned something about the Cowboys and how Golden State seems to be more accountable, to very similar organizations in terms of, and he goes, listen, let me just stop you real quick. I understand you're kind of talking in a little bit of a negative. And my point was, I wish the Cowboys seemed as accountable as Golden State seemed to be. He goes, let me tell you, they are the gold standard. They are what I strive to be. So he kind of interrupted me like, however you and fans view the Cowboys, I view them completely differently.
Like from an operational perspective.
You just look at how much the Cowboys are worth. They are what every sports organization strives to be. Now, maybe not on the field, obviously, but in terms of business and how the Cowboys as a brand, Jerry Jones is a genius. And I will say that the difference between Jerry and Mark is that while Mark would push back on criticisms, and disagree with you, Jerry Jones has the thickest. He must have like 10 layers of skin. Like, he has got very thick skin. You never hear any pushback from Jerry.
Do you think it's that he doesn't care and is just laughing all the way to the bank?
No, I think he cares. I think he just understands that, sometimes being in the news is, even if it's not for something positive, is not altogether bad.
Yeah. What a lot of people don't understand about the Cowboys organization and the family is the breadth and depth of business operations. The ownership of other businesses and other companies, real estate, et cetera, et cetera. It's almost an anomaly that you can be one of America's most loved teams, continue to lose year after year after year, and then continue not only to be beloved but make billions.
Yeah, you could write 5 books on the Cowboys. How they've done this is probably the most unbelievable thing that's ever happened in sports. It'd be like say the New York Yankees. The New York Yankees there would be no way they could survive 30 years of like this, right? But since they're the Yankees and they spend money, they do occasionally break through and win.
Yeah.
The Cowboys have kind of weatherproofed themselves in terms of just fans are always going to love. Fans kind of love to hate the Cowboys. That's the other aspect of it. They're always going to be a lightning rod for good and for bad.
So that's a great transition into the business of sports in general. Mm-hmm. What have you seen change the most in your 30 years as it relates to perhaps not just the professionalization of the business of sports, corporations, but also the athletes? I mean, these athletes understand that they own their own brand now and are their own business as well. And I don't know if Michael Jordan was the first or if there were others, but how would you characterize it?
Well, from my standpoint, covering the NBA, as an example, it's changed dramatically. I mean, you used to, in terms of access, you could sidle up to a player before a game in the locker room or walk off with a player after a game or after a practice. The accessibility is night and day. And I think that's the biggest thing that's changed. I think a lot of these guys do have their teams. They are carefully, there's a sculpting that goes on that where their teams are told, and then it comes through at the organizational level too. PR teams make this player available for 3 minutes after a game, as opposed to standing there. Dirk used to, after every game, you'd be in the locker room, win or lose, Dirk knew that you were going to want to hear from him, and he would come in the locker room and stand in the locker room and go, ready? And so if you were interviewing another player, you knew this was your time to hear from Dirk. Okay? That accessibility is gone. It's gone.
Why?
I just think that organizations and the people around the players are just a lot more guarded about what that player was, and probably the media is greatly at fault because the media has changed too. I think the media, frankly, I think the media has. I wouldn't say like in terms of the Dallas Morning News and traditional media, but the amount of kind of surrounding media has changed. And so like sound bites can be taken out of context. Even if a reporter, quote unquote reporter, is not in the room, they can take a sound bite from something and then create a post from it. And things like that happen all the time. And I do think that has been a big factor in athletes and organizations kind of circling the wagons quite a bit.
Because you say quote unquote reporter. I mean, are you talking about the notion that the definition of being a journalist in journalism is now changed?
Yeah, dramatically. And some of those reporters wouldn't like to hear me say quote unquote. But if you're sitting on your couch and you never go to games, you never go to practices, you don't ever, you don't try to have any kind of connection to ask the hard questions that are in your mind, and you just write whatever comes up, you take a spin off what somebody else is writing, that's not journalism. But some of these guys consider themselves, quote unquote, beat reporters. They're not beat reporters. If you're not there, you're not a beat reporter.
And how about training, or the rules of engagement? Is that still important? I mean, you mentioned you have sourcing standards at the Dallas Morning News. Mm-hmm. Some of these folks who consider themselves journalists but may not have been trained as a journalist have as many readers as you do, but do they follow the same rules? Do they have to follow the same rules?
Some do. I shouldn't just throw like a big, wet blanket over the whole industry, but the standards are definitely dropped, not universally. So here's the thing. So in traditional media, there are fewer of us, right? There are more of the non-traditional. And so it's kind of like the Wild West out there. And so what you're asking me a question. I don't want to paint everybody with it, but I would say in general the standards have dropped because we don't know how many of these reporters went to journalism school, took journalism law, journalism standards. Wrote for their school paper, worked for their. There's just a lot of unknown.
And the intentionality also, right? I mean, I imagine, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I imagine you go to work every day, you want to do a balanced job. Right? You want to ask the hardest questions you possibly can.
Correct.
And reflect as close to the whatever truth is.
Yes.
Right? But there's a lot of people who are now practicing quote-unquote journalism who are actually advocates for a particular point of view. Doesn't that make your job harder?
It does, because if you're, we were talking about the athletes and the teams, if you're in terms of their perspective, that what you're talking about, the fact that there's one-sidedness, there's going to be organizations out there that are going to only take one point of view, that definitely colors your overall perception of the media. So yeah, it makes everybody's job harder.
Yeah. What do you do to combat that? And by the way, and perhaps you'll be willing to comment on this, the other side of the coin, not only do you have more folks who are, maybe it's unfair to say playing journalist, but journalism outlets haven't done themselves any favors either in the business of journalism. You mentioned there are fewer of you. Mm-hmm. What do the traditional media outlets, what blame do they have in this erosion of trust, if you will, of journalism as a whole?
Well, that is a bigger question because that goes outside of sports in my
Sure.
So I really can only speak from sports.
Okay, fair enough.
So there are fewer of us. I'd like to think that we as an organization, we as reporters, the ones that are like showing up at Cowboys practices, the ones that are at every game, we certainly like to think that we've still earned a respect level, and I think it's a two-way street. You know that if you I would say step out of line, but if you are unfair, and if you do write something critical and you don't show up the next day, that's going to affect your level of coverage. And so I don't think our standards in terms of sports writers and how we cover the Dallas sports teams, I don't think that's changed at all. The access has changed, but I think I could proudly say that we as a newspaper, as a media company, we're still doing a good job.
Yeah.
There's fewer of us, but we still have one more thing about Luka. Okay, so the day after the trade, you open the Dallas Morning News, on the cover, he is a big picture of Luka. It says he was ours. Okay. So as a sports writer, ours, we don't deal in we, okay? Uh-huh. We deal in, they're the Dallas Mavericks, okay? But I feel like our newspaper, that's one of the most important things a media company can do is reflect the feelings of a community and what's important to a community. And I thought that headline, as much as it probably like hit to the core of, like, it was heartbreaking probably, it really effectively, I was proud of our paper because we reflected the mood of the community, how the community was feeling. And that's one of the most important things a media company can do. And and some of our stories that were in that section reflected that because we actually went out in the middle of the night. We had reporters go out in the middle of the night and interview fans that were like already protesting outside. So it was a reflection of our coverage too.
Yeah.
So, but the big takeaway was we get it.
Let's go back to athletes.
Okay.
And because you mentioned Dirk Nowitzki and access is more difficult. And of course, we now have college players who can be compensated, right? And that's a whole other argument that we won't get into today. Mm-hmm. But besides them being more guarded, what are the differences and the pressures that they're facing? And how do you see them navigating reputational crises with the media, either better or more poorly? Generally speaking, what do you see?
On the college level?
Both, college and pro.
Well, on the college level, there's just so many more layers because college SID staffs, you're talking about, like, on the pro level, an athlete is pretty much required to be available, or at least he or she can choose to be in the locker room during that 10-minute period, after the 10-minute cooling off period. College level, I mean, they can just make some programs have like taken this. If he's a freshman, you're not going to interview him. If he's an assistant coach, no interviews. I mean, there's clearly, lines that are like set in stone.
Yeah.
These are the rules, and there's no getting around them.
Yeah.
Right? There's more flexibility in sport because, frankly, NBA rules, Players Association, the collective bargaining agreement is that players are to be available to media. So college and pros those defined lines that I was talking about earlier, much more rigid in college sports now, and so that allows the athlete to really like almost like go into hiding, except for like right after the game, you're the star quarterback. Yeah, you'll be asked to say something, but again, that's like a 5-minute snippet after a game, a lot more controlled. And so, and frankly, you're seeing a lot more of a professionalization from that standpoint because, a lot of these guys, so now they can afford their own PR people. Mm-hmm. And so, like, you could go ask the let's just say the star quarterback, you're trying to do a University of Texas quarterback feature, you could go to the SID and they're just going to maybe tell you a blanket no. Or you can go to the company that assigned that star quarterback and say, we'd like, to do a story.
What do you find that athletes and sports franchises do wrong the most in dealing with a reputational crisis? How are they mishandling themselves most often with the media?
The biggest thing is not being available, okay? Avoidance. Avoidance is not going to help anybody. It's, I go back to the covering let's just say you're covering a Mavericks game comes down the last couple seconds, player A drives in the lane, puts up a bad shot, game over, Mavs lose by 1. Okay. That player needs to be, it's not life or death, right? But that player needs to be available after the game to say what he was thinking, okay? Take that as a little snippet and just broaden it, okay? Whether it's a college team, college coach, professional team, they need to be available to answer the basic questions. And that's the biggest change, is the accountability that has lessened. And I think the Mavericks are a big lesson in that.
Sure. Okay, we're going to move to a kind of a lightning round. So there's some questions for you. A couple of these will take a little bit longer if you have them. I'm curious if there are certain crisis moments in sports history, one that might stand out as a reputational turning point for a team, a player, or an executive. You mentioned Jason Kidd earlier. Is there one particular, and it doesn't have to be the Mavs, one particular crisis moment in sports history that you've covered that really stands out as that turning point?
Well, I'll bring up another local example, and it's a great example, Scottie Scheffler. Okay, so Scottie Scheffler has a complete, his reputation is unquestioned.
Pristine.
Pristine. The guy, his family is tremendous. I've known his family since he was, 16 years old playing at the Byron Nelson tournament. So one day he's number one golfer in the world. He tries to pull into the PGA Championship, and, we know what happened.
Well,
right?
Recount for our listeners who don't remember, briefly recount it.
So, it's practically dark. It's like 6-something in the morning. There's a traffic jam. It's in Louisville, Kentucky. So what he didn't realize is that a pedestrian had been killed. And so security around the club had heightened.
Yeah.
And there was, sensitivities were heightened. And, you can say, I guess there's, whether he was right or wrong, he's the number one golfer in the world. He is pulling up to the clubhouse. He's got badges on and all that. And, a policeman tried to stop him. And, there's differing accounts on exactly what happened. But the result is the number one golfer in the world with a pristine reputation. Next thing you know, he's not only in handcuffs, it's happening in real time. And it's a shocking development. I mean, you're talking about as shocking as the Luka Dončić thing was. This was probably up there in terms of shock level, okay? But listen, So he's taken to jail. Now, we realized he didn't kill anybody. He didn't.
Right.
But all of a sudden, everything was swirling. Was he getting preferential treatment? Was he being unfairly treated? He gets out of jail. His team, his family, and his team rally around him. He gets legal representation. He gets out. He goes to the PGA Championship and shoots like a 66. Unbelievable, right?
Yes.
Afterward, he hit every right note. He didn't have to be coached.
What did he say? Remind us what he said.
He said, "Look, it was a big misunderstanding. Police officers have a job to do. But he was also introspective. He was honest. He described being in the jail cell, shaking. He gave the personal, he talked about how it affected him as a human being, but he was also very respectful, saying, well, I think there's certain things I can't say. I think this will, I think when the whole story comes out, but he answered every question honestly, and he made sure to say, look, I respect police officers and the job they do.
Yeah. So that's a story of someone with a great reputation who protected it and did it the right way.
Yeah.
Is there a situation from the other side that really surprised you, where the mighty fell and handled it poorly, and part of the reason that they might have fallen from a reputation perspective is because of they handled it? Any sports situation come to mind with a brand or a particular individual?
Well, I think the Mavericks, we've already discussed that at length.
Yeah.
Another one that jumps out is like when the Cowboys and when Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson had their falling out. That was a kind of a thing that obviously completely spun out of control. I don't know what the Cowboys could have done differently, honestly, back then, but you had so many. There was no way to rein that story in.
Yeah.
But I don't think the Cowboys. Jerry didn't handle that correctly, and neither did Jimmy. That's the big one that jumps out. Where like when you're talking about Dallas Fort Worth sports history, that's the closest example to the Mavericks of just everything crashing down
all
suddenly.
At once.
Yeah.
Okay. So here we go with lightning round questions. The dream team or sport that you would want to cover of something other than basketball.
I've been to the Kentucky Derby site, but I've never covered the Kentucky Derby. Probably also maybe the Indy 500.
Okay. Favorite retired athlete? I won't ask you who your favorite current athlete is. That's not fair. Favorite retired athlete?
Well, he's deceased now, but Byron Nelson was clearly my favorite and will always be.
Well, that could be a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
Most memorable sports moment?
You mean that I witnessed in person?
Oh, sure.
1999 British Open. Jean Van de Velde. I'm standing behind the 18th green, and Jean Van de Velde goes in the water. It completely takes himself. He's leading the British Open by 3 shots, and it was complete, utter collapse.
Oh.
Yeah, it's pretty. If you Google it, it's pretty. It's probably the biggest golf major collapse in history, and the rare thing where I'm actually over.
You were there
in Europe. Yeah.
Most memorable athlete interview?
Well, yeah, that's pretty easy too. Dirk Nowitzki. So I once got to spend, after really several years of reaching out or asking Dirk if I could do this, was I toured Children's Hospital with him while he's visiting patients. It's really kind of a fly on the wall, and that was, frankly, an honor and a privilege.
And just kudos to you. I think at his very last game, they showed a video of you two together. Really was less about the interview and more about all of it. And it was a bit of a tribute to you, too, if I recall. So, well done. The sports figure you would want to write a book about? Or maybe are.
No. Wow. I would like to write the Mark Cuban book. I wrote a story about him once that I think is still probably, I'd like to think, one of the better stories about Mark, about when he first got to Dallas and he was really penniless and lived in an apartment, shared an apartment with 4 guys, and he slept on the floor. I mean, the Mark Cuban story is a movie.
Yeah.
I frequently asked him, he goes, no, there will never be a movie. But that is just utterly fascinating. Just this guy who went to University of Indiana from Pittsburgh, came to Dallas in 1992 with a Fiat X19, hole in the floorboard, wrinkled clothes in the back of his car, came with nothing, and became Mark Cuban.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, favorite arena or stadium to cover a game, preferably outside of Dallas?
Well, my favorite, I'm really old school and showing off my age. I covered one of the last few games in Boston Garden. The Mavs were there near the end of that. Those Chicago Stadium. Now those places were really armpits. Like, they were not good by their. There was a reason that those places got new arena. But I mean, just to be there and covering those NBA Finals in the old Chicago Stadium was pretty cool. Yankee Stadium, and I've been fortunate because I've covered several British Opens, and so to be in Troon or to be at St. Andrews.
Yeah.
Those are kind of bucket list things. I also covered a Tour de France. That was crazy, obviously.
Wow.
So
Lance Armstrong, was he riding?
Yeah, I was actually covering the British Open. Actually, the British Open that I mentioned was Jean Van de Velde melting down. I'd been called during that British Open, hey, since you're over in Europe, this guy from Dallas looks like he's going to win the Tour de France. Can you get over to France after the British Open? So I scrambled and went over and rented a car in the middle of the night and drove down, through France to catch up to where the Tour de France was. Followed him up, ended up having like the night before he rode into Paris, it was just me and Lance Armstrong, like at midnight, just sitting, talking about his life growing up in Texas and in Dallas, and what a big moment this was going to be for him.
Yeah.
That in terms of interviews, that's pretty big. Now, I did ask him point blank if he was cheating, and he said no.
Talk about an iconic figure that also fell.
Yeah.
Right. And still hasn't recovered.
Yeah.
Or if ever. One thing that fans think they understand about sports journalism but totally get wrong.
Well, they think that we're... Listen, it's great to be at these events, but you're working. So I will still have friends who will, like, as a last second great shot or whatever, once in a while they'll be texting me, dude, I'm in the middle, I'm on deadline. Like, that's what people don't understand is sometimes, like with a newspaper, the game could end at 10 o'clock. I have to have a version of a story in, like, at the buzzer.
Yeah.
So don't text me during...
Bad time.
Right. Bad time.
I remember hearing one story about you. This is perhaps when you were flying with the Mavericks, that you were under deadline, you had Wi-Fi, and the plane couldn't take off until you filed your story. And the team in Cuban were all like, "Come on, Brad."
Yeah, no, that's
not quite.
No, they were
That's
never
an
going to hold
exaggeration.
anything up. But there were many times when I scrambled that I had to make sure that I was sweating the fact that they weren't going to hold it for me. So,
All right, we ask everybody these: favorite subject in school,
English,
major in college,
journalism,
favorite holiday,
Christmas,
favorite hobby,
golf.
favorite guilty pleasure. Maybe that's the same.
Yeah.
Golf. Okay.
Right.
Your favorite brand? Like, do you have a brand name that you like, or a sports franchise, perhaps?
Well, I grew up as a Spurs fan, and you talk about a brand. That's a iconic brand.
You have a favorite movie?
I can't say. No, not
favorite
really.
Favorite sports movie?
I mean, when I was a kid, the movie One on One with Robbie Benson,
Sure.
I love that thing. Hoosiers, terrific movie. Anything with kind of basketball. I like.
Favorite day of the week?
Sunday.
Hidden talent or superpower?
Zilch. I don't
No? Oh, come on.
Hidden talent?
Yeah.
No, I can't think. I honestly can't
Okay, let me
think.
ask
Oh, well,
you
I will say this. Okay, so I did play basketball in high school.
Yeah.
So, and I was Mr. Basketball of my high school.
Fantastic.
I don't think, I don't make that a public because I'm way past that. So, but I did it. I did. I do cover basketball, and there is a reason that I
You love
gravitate to basketball is because I actually played varsity basketball.
If you had to pick a career other than sports journalism, what would it be?
Something in communications, probably, because my grandfather was a newspaper reporter. He covered outdoors.
Yeah.
Now I was not a hunter and fisher like him, but just something in the communication field. I kind of feel like it's my
Your deal.
I write.
If you could pick one person, living or dead, that you could meet for dinner, who would it be?
Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah? I thought you would say a sports person.
Well, I mean, you did ask a broad question, so
Fair enough. You can tell my journalism skills are a little dusty at best. Favorite sports figure you'd have a dinner with, alive or dead? Someone you like to spend more time with?
Yeah, well, I mean, I say golf is probably my second love. So I'd say like Ben Hogan.
Yeah.
I got to know Byron. I would have liked to have known Ben better.
Yeah. Brad Townsend, thank you so much for your time. You've been so generous and so open. Fascinating to get your take on journalism, sports journalism, the Mavs, athletic brands, athletes, all of it. Just
appreciate you having me. Hope I didn't babble too much.
No, wonderful time. And thank you all for joining us on Reputation Matters. Be sure to check out this and other episodes at sunwestpr.com or on your favorite platform for any kind of podcasts. And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reputation Matters. Find us at sunwestpr.com or your favorite podcast streaming service. Until next time.